Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the broadcast this evening. As usual, it promises to be an exciting time. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator. Good evening to you.
Yes, sir. How has the day been, sir?
Well, I don't know. You keep wanting good news to come out from somewhere. Just good news. Whether it's ceasefire, whether it's somebody being sworn in a country that has had peaceful elections. I know they did in South Korea, but it's all doom and gloom. It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate indeed.
But sir, in the Nigerian context, before we go into all the other things, what is the weather like, sir, in Nigeria? Because we're starting to get into summer on our end. What's it like on your end, sir?
Well, it's steaming hot, at least in Lagos. I don't know what it is in other parts of the country. But I said it's all doom and gloom. And you're asking me about the weather. One would like some rain to freshen the atmosphere so that the leaves and the flowers could start blooming. One would like to see friends and shake hands and say hello to them. Because of, I know we don't talk about Omicron anymore, but it's interesting how wearing face masks and not shaking hands have become part of our daily existence. We've just adjusted to looking like masquerades. You don't even recognize your friends when you meet them until when they then pull down, oh, it's me. And they say, oh, hello. And you don't even put out your hands to shake your hands. It's already a fist bumping. That is how we greet each other now.
I guess it's becoming part of our culture, sir, going forward, that COVID has changed the way of life and the way of living for so many people.
I prefer the the Indian greeting. I prefer that than this fist bumping, in case you don't know who wants to bump you in the face and say, oh, I missed your hand, Oh.
All right. We've got a lot to talk about today, but let's still start from the usual one, where we've continued to see developments around Russia, around Ukraine, and what's going on there. Who would have thought that going into the third week, we would still be having this conversation of Russia is still trying to occupy Ukraine, and Ukraine is holding out. What are your comments about what has happened so far, sir, before we start to look at other topics?
I think I know what you are trying to get me to say. You are trying to get me to applaud the pluckiness of the Ukrainians, draw attention to their courage, and call them out for applause. Yes. All that now we have to do, because this is a David fighting a Goliath. Absolutely no doubt about it. But the cost is horrendous. The cost is horrendous. Cities have been destroyed. Reminds me of those films about the Second World War, what Europe looked like, especially when they are using newsreels rather than the Hollywood montage. Now I really see what, war looks like in urban settings. I see, like everybody else, children saying goodbye to fathers. And there are some of it which are not acted and which remains with you. A little kid saying goodbye to her father, and she's really crying her eyes out. She's probably about 3 years old or so, and banging on the helmet that the father is wearing, as if that helmet is the enemy. Obviously, that child was aware of the separation that was about to take place. The father was offering her, obviously, what was one of her favorite sweets, and she just swatted it out of the way. You don't see that kind of an image and feel good with yourself. And there was an old man who had helped to evacuate, dead bodies and injured people in that hospital that was bombed. And at the end of it, he said, I don't care who is right, who is wrong. To hell with all of them. That old man had reached the end of his tether, and his soul was now on challenge. And yet, I hear the repetition of demands by the president of Ukraine, demands that cannot be met, and everybody knows why they cannot be met. But whether what he's saying is, let us have a third world war. This is hell for Ukraine, so I don't care. Give me that blanketing of the overhead flights. But of course, in all of this, one shouldn't take pride in saying, well, I was right about something. Yesterday, the president of Ukraine now said, I am prepared to give my word that Ukraine will not join NATO. I said this a month ago when you asked me on this program, okay, what do you think is the way forward so that we won't have war? And I said, Ukraine should give up in a written document attested to by maybe the UN and everybody that it will not join NATO. And in exchange, Russia should give up any claim to any part of Ukrainian territory. But, well, nobody listened to me at that time. I suppose they don't really get our podcast, which is a shame. If we had the kind of coverage of CNN or BBC World Service or Al Jazeera, Somebody probably will ask the president of Ukraine, somebody suggested this a month ago. Why has it taken almost the destruction of all your cities for you to see the wisdom in what, he has suggested? Now, of course, Russia is not going to listen to him now. Russia is temporarily on a winning streak. I am not a military man, but from what I've seen, but the lesson we've all learned from Ukraine is that there are no geniuses anywhere, whether in the Kremlin or in the White House or from soldiers with 4 pips on their shoulder, brass, shining this and everything. There are no geniuses. We're all just involved in a guessing game, including those leading young men to war. But let me put in my own tuppence, which is that, yes, Russia will overrun cities because it has the firepower, but it will not be able to hold those cities. Every day, it will be losing lives of young soldiers to guerrilla fighters. This is partisan warfare, and the territory is just good for that. If you go and read the history of Greece during the Second World War, what the partisans were able to do to Hitler's soldiers, then you will know what the Russians are setting themselves up to. So I'm afraid we are not going to wake up tomorrow and have good news. Or next week and have good news. It's going to be grimy. It is.
Thank you for that, sir. But one question that comes to mind, sir, when we look at this issue going on, is how long is it going to take for the Russian people themselves to begin to revolt? Not just small protests here and there, major protests, the kind of protests that may even have brought down a previous Russian government. How long more do you think the Russians can hold out and continue to watch what is going on without those kind of protests?
If you understand or study the psychology of not just micro dictators trying to copy macro dictators, but countries where the governments are experts at ruling people without the consent of the people, then it's going to take a long, long time, because the people have developed, what will we call it? They've developed they've developed an attitude of simply taking it on the chin, as the British will say. They know what suffering is. They are used to suffering. They are used to being satisfied with whatever little the government offers. And they've conditioned themselves to see their governments as protectors against an external enemy. Therefore, is going to take a long, long while. Uh, uh, if you look at the history of Russia itself, for how long the peasants suffered under the czars, and you kept having demonstrations, you kept having mini uprising, but it took the major losses by the Russian army in the First World War for the returning soldiers to provide the backbone of the revolution in 1917. First, the Menshevik Revolution, and then the Bolshevik revolution. But in the midst of all of this, you've had a group of revolutionaries, Lenin, Stalin, Tolstoy, Trotsky, not Tolstoy, Trotsky, who had been over the years preaching revolution, trying to undermine the Tsar before the revolution finally took place. I don't believe that for the next 10 years, we are likely to see any revolution in the Soviet Union. A modern case that may be close to this is what the Chinese suffered during the Cultural Revolution under Mao Zedong. People were dying on the street every day from starvation, and the whole society was in an uproar, turned upside down, and yet the Communist Party, Mao, was not overthrown. They waited until he died before the party itself then started reversing the causes of the Cultural Revolution. So I don't see Putin. Putin may be overthrown by the army. Yes, I'm not ruling that out. But it will not be a revolution. It will be a palace coup.
Sir, let us look at this from a slightly different angle now. And this is regarding the future of both Putin and Zelensky in Ukraine. What does their political future look like when all of this ends? Is Zelensky going to be seen as the hero, or the man who waited for the whole country to be destroyed as much as it has and then gave up? And the same thing on the side of Putin. How do you think they will be perceived when all of this ends?
I'm not sure I can go that far. Because each one of them will be able to activate the factor of the external enemy. Our external enemies did this to us, whether you British are rather funny people. I know you throw out Winston Churchill, the hero, the British hero of the Second World War, who gave you the backbone to withstand, with the help of the Americans, all that the Germans could throw at you. But in most countries, the war prime minister or war president is often accepted as the hero who, whatever, if he stayed on, till the end will not get sacrificed. Because that will again will almost be as if one was being disloyal, one was being a traitor. There was a man who stood in the gap for you, or he didn't even run away, even though he could have been assassinated, he could have been captured. And we know the history of people who of leaders who get captured by the Russians. No, I think that it should be regarded as being churlish to then start asking questions whether the judgment, the calls that were made during the war were the right calls or not. No, I think history is going to be kind, at least to the president in Poland. As far as Putin is concerned, he's going to win the war in the sense that the Russians the Russian soldiers are not going to come back with their tail between their legs. After all, they've experienced it in Afghanistan when they finally had to pull out. And that was a defeat for them. But it was put, it wasn't as if they were defeated by a major force. And after all, the Americans have just pulled out of Afghanistan, and nobody is saying that Trump or Biden should be taken before the International Criminal Court of Justice or the World Court for conduct unbecoming of a gentleman. So it's going to be the same thing. It's going to be the same thing.
All right, let me put one last question to you, sir, before we move on from Russia, Ukraine. And that is this: since the beginning of this conflict, the West has loaded on sanction after sanction after sanction. And that seems to be having an effect on the Russian economy. Not only from the United States, but a lot of the countries have taken sides with Ukraine in this war. How does the West come back from what has all these sanctions they have put on Russia? How do they come back? Can the relationship ever return to the status quo?
Of course. This is politics, be it international politics at its best. Where has the United States gone in terms of looking for alternative sources of crude oil? It's gone to Venezuela, on which it had imposed sanctions of how many years? It has even tried to overthrow the president of there. It has sent a delegation there. And it should be like, look, let's be mature about these things. The past is the past. Now let's close the book and move on. It has sent a delegation to Iran, I understand, again to ask them, that oil that we say you will never sell, please can you turn on your tap and let the oil flow? All to insulate the Western economies from the shortage that will come with the sanctions being imposed on Russia. Now, we are going to, when I say we, low income and medium income countries are going to pay a heavy price. Not from the sanctions as such, but from the effect of the war itself on the on agricultural production of wheat. There's going to be a shortage of wheat, a shortage of flour, and that means a shortage of bread and an increase in whatever quantity of bread is available. The country that's going to reap benefits from all of this, of course, is China. China has a large population to feed, and it will now have access to Russian wheat. The agricultural fields of Ukraine will be destroyed by the war. Nobody goes to farm in the middle of a war. So the net effect is that there will still be a shortage of wheat on the world market. But believe me, as soon as the last gunshot is fired, ceasefire declared, don't be surprised if those planes now start flying all across to sign new agreements. And of course, that's where diplomats come into their own. Soldiers will now go into seclusion, go and lick their wounds, while diplomats, who know how to smile even when they hate your guts, and remind you of how friendships that have lasted centuries, and if only we diplomats have been allowed to manage the whole thing, of course, we would never have gone to war. It's not our fault. So let's close those books and move this way. Yeah, it will be business as usual. Business as usual.
Looks like some people online are agreeing with you. Someone here says Russia is trying to bomb Ukraine to submission, but will it stop now that the Ukrainian leader has given his words that his country will not join NATO? Let us hope so. Another person here is saying it's a shame that Putin will glow at killing children, women, and all, and claim victory. Zelensky's bravery makes him still stand out with a better standing for defending the integrity of Ukraine. Let us move on to another development, sir, that we've seen in other parts of the world, and one that I think we touched on quite a while back. And this is the fact that Israel's president is holding talks with his Turkish counterpart. And one of the things they were talking about was some sort of bilateral deal between Israel and Turkey. What do you see about the timing of this visit by the Israeli president, the first time since 2008 that we've had an Israeli leader meet in Turkey? What do you see about that situation, sir?
Well, recall that probably by the third or fourth program on this platform, I have brought up the issue of a new world order. We don't know what it's going to look like. It's going to be like what was the deal called? Not a chessboard.
Jigsaw.
It will be like a jigsaw puzzle. Nobody knows what the end will look like. So you bring in your pieces. The medium power countries are determined that they're not going to leave it to the Chinese or the Russians and the Americans to decide what the size and the outcome of the puzzle will look like. So middle income countries or medium power countries are making their own bidding to claim a seat at the table. After all, come to think of it, at the end of the Second World War, really, if you want to be that specific and truthful about it, the only two members who should be in the Security Council are the Russians and the Americans. That's all. But for reasons that need not detain us here, they allowed medium power countries like Britain, like France, like China at that time to come in as permanent members. And of course, because of the factor of the war, left out Germany and Japan, who had better claim to being members of the Security Council. So you never can tell the circumstances that will lead to the circumstances that will be factored in this jigsaw puzzle. So I see all this toing and froing by medium power countries as part of their own strategy, calling attention to their existence and letting people know we are not going to be ignored. We will ensure that. Number two, both Turkey and Israel have good relationship with both Ukraine and Russia. And they want to seize the opportunity to say to each other, we can be useful in mediation of this conflict. Should the time arrive when people are tired and they are looking for people to save their faces, we may just be useful here. Of course, the the spoiler in all of this between Israel and Turkey, and they both know it, is the issue of the Palestinians. It has derailed Turkish-Israeli relationship in the past, and it is still capable of derailing it. To me, probably a country like India, a country like Sweden, a country like maybe even Egypt. I mean, you could sit down and handpick maybe, 5 to 7, Brazil, and that kind of thing. Should be having talks. Number one, about what should be the shape of the new world order. 2, how do we ensure that there's no monopoly by the big powers? And 3, how are there any issues around the table in the world that we, who at least are not directly affected by this conflict, could be playing a role? Who knows? There may be a need for peacekeepers, United Nations peacekeeping forces along Russian-Ukrainian border. Maybe, we should be looking at the possibility of our countries being ready to offer troops at that time. To me, this is the way my own mind is working.
Someone says, isn't this the best time for the medium power countries to reach out to our own medium power apostle as a useful consultant to midwife the required diplomacy to save the world? I guess you are no longer a prophet now. You are now an apostle, sir.
Well, look, you are the pastor. What's the difference between a prophet and an apostle?
Well, in some order, the apostle is the senior one to the prophet. So,
but you know, a prophet, no, an apostle, just like a prophet, is without honor in his own country.
that's why they refer to you as a prophet, sir. All right, sir. Let's go to Africa. Let's go back to Africa here, sir. Tunisia specifically. And this is an interesting one because Tunisia, some time ago, the president uh, dismantled the whole parliament, and now he's preparing to rewrite the constitution. And he said he wants to have a consultative process, and he has chosen to send out questionnaires online to find the pulse of the nation when it comes to this issue of rewriting the constitution. I know you were part of a team that did something similar in terms of trying to bring together different people from different areas of the country. How effective is his method going to be? And is it something you would have used at the time if that had been something that had come up?
It depends on the acceptability by the population, by the citizens. Because that is really an indirect referendum, the consultative process that the president of Tunisia has adopted. But you will also notice that he seems to have found no level of acceptance by the people of Tunisia, simply because they are responding to the calls by their leaders to not to accept the process that the president was putting forward. Now, look, let me say this right away. Let me put this forward. I get very irritated. Maybe I really need, for an old man, more patience than I have. But I get very irritated at the political posturing, especially in medium power countries or low income countries. When a man surrounds himself with maybe 20 MPs and claim and hold on to that tenaciously, knowing that 20 MPs cannot form a government, but it can disrupt the processes of governance. And so in a place like Tunisia, you end up having how many political parties? All of them together can never agree on anything useful, but they can all agree on saying no to whatever comes out of the presidency. It's the same thing you have in Lebanon. And, I can come forward with how many countries. And so What purpose does it have? If you're a political leader and you cannot create, but you can destroy, what purpose does your existence serve? And this was why I actually, well, I won't say, again, I won't say I was an apostle. I will say I was a supporter of President Babangida's two-party system. I got roasted. Those of us who supported got roasted. How can you are being fascist. Let people form their own parties. So some people will form their parties on religious basis. Some people will form their parties on ethnic basis. Some people will form their parties on ideological basis. And before you know it, and some will just be, so their names can be registered as presidential aspirant. They know they are not going to get 50 votes, but they will still run for the presidency and scatter the whole process. To me, you have just been an anarchist when you decide to do that. So now that, for all practical purposes, the proposal of the president in sending out those questionnaires have been rejected because of the few number who came back. Okay, if I were, I will meet then the leaders of the political parties and say, you were opposed to my consultative process. You come up with a suggestion as to how we move this process further. But we are not going to go back to a parliament that has 50 or even 25 political parties. And all you ever do is to scream and yell at each other and not be able to even approve a budget or come up with an alternative. That's what I will do. Throw the ball back in their court.
Thank you for that, sir. While we're still on Africa, we said we were looking for some good news. I will call it news, but then I want to hear your take on it, whether we refer to it as good news or not. And that is the fact that Moderna, one of the companies creating the COVID-19 vaccine, has now said they have signed a memorandum of understanding with Kenya to have a facility within Kenya to produce the vaccines for Africa. What is your take on that, sir?
The devil is always in the details. I recall some time ago that I believe it was Johnson & Johnson had an agreement for, I think maybe it was packaging or something in South Africa on vaccines, and then included as part of the agreement, included an issue that those vaccines cannot be used in South Africa, but they must be exported to Europe. Now, there was an uproar when that detail became available. How devilish could you be that South Africa, where people were dying at that time, you will still force down their throats signing an agreement that allows them to package your vaccine, but they must be shipped to Europe. The ability of human beings to be evil never ceases to amaze me, honestly. Now, I wouldn't want to go into who's more devilish than the other in terms of, is it our brothers who are located in the northern hemisphere than our brothers who are located in the eastern hemisphere, or whatever it is. We know who we know who the producers are, and we know who does what. We know who did slavery. We know who became experts in the Holocaust, which incidentally didn't start in Europe, started in Namibia by the same country that later on exported it to Europe. But
conversation for another day.
Yeah.
Someone is asking a question here, sir, and I'll just kind of paraphrase this. They want to hear your views about the Iran nuclear deal and the fact that that nuclear deal was almost coming to an end. The United States and Iran were about to agree, but then they hit a stumbling block with Russia. And Russia seems to be saying that they will stop that deal from going ahead without, if the United States does not give them some assurance that their trade with Iran will not be subject to sanctions. So, first question, really, I think I can pick from what this person is saying here is it a good thing that we're going back to this 2015 accord? And the second thing I can say there is, will the United States budge on this point, particularly at this time that they are giving they're putting a lot of sanctions on Russia? Will they budge on this particular point?
My take, not only on the Iranian issue, because I've already pointed out to you that an American delegation had actually been meeting with the Iranian delegation on allowing Iran to turn on the tap for crude oil. And they're doing the same thing with Venezuela. So my take on this issue is that, look, all options are open. These are no longer usual times. The United States should climb down from its high horse of a lot of the things that she had done during the period when she was the unipolar global power, dictating to other people, flinging sanctions right, left, and center. I don't think other countries are going to insist on mea culpa by the Americans. They will probably just insist on get rid of this, your sanctions on us, and let's do business, straight business. We don't need interlocutors. And while at it, I must also throw in Cuba, because Cuba had gone far in terms of scientific innovations that were being blocked by the United States. This, to me, is the right time for for Biden to say, listen, we've had enough of this enmity between us. Let us just get things straight. Unfortunately, I don't see, and I said this a year ago, I don't see in the Biden team people like, if you like, people like Kissinger, people like Schlesinger, people like, all those, the brightest and the best that surrounded Kennedy in those days. I don't see them who can think outside the box, who can, I don't see them. I don't know what Kissinger had to do to persuade Nixon that this is the time to go to China and let us get our relationship right and let us forget the past. I don't know what he had to do, but obviously he was persuasive enough to get President Nixon to go to China. Biden needs people who can think outside the box and who can seize the situation to not to American detriment, no, but help the United States to get over a lot of the mistakes of arrogance of power in the past. Because now that'll be very clear to the United States that there are other big boys on the block now. The United States is not the only block. There are other big boys. And what this calls for is a think tank, maybe in the White House or in the State Department or in the Defense Department, who will now come up with, I don't know what to call it, to help in arranging a relationship with these new boys who are coming up.
Thank you, sir. I was going to ask you a question about North Korea and the fact that the US has announced that they are stepping up intelligence activities following the continued missile tests by North Korea in that region. But there's a question here that I want to throw to you. This one is coming from someone on YouTube, and I will try to paraphrase this, sir. And this has to do with the continued release of sanctions by countries, including the United Kingdom, on individuals that they've said have links to the Kremlin. So they have, I think they released a list of about 7 more names today. How effective is that going to be, the sanctions on individuals?
Well, you know that the rationale behind that is that these oligarchs, as they call them, are the people hiding Putin's money. That's where the bodies are buried. And that if they are squeezed, recall you asked me a question much earlier on as to whether Putin can be overthrown or not. And I replied that it will have to be a palace coup, where the rationale in the West is that if these people are squeezed, then they themselves may withdraw their support for Putin or tell Putin the game is over. They have us where they want us. And it's better to look for an exit strategy from this mess in Ukraine. That is why they're why they're seizing these properties and calling out names. And I must say, I'm happy that we didn't sell Manchester United to anybody who's being called out now. We had better sense.
I gather you support the Red Vest then, sir.
That's the only team in the world now.
Did you watch the game last Sunday?
No, I didn't. But that's a fluke. You know, don't worry, we'll get our act together.
But
Sooner or later we will.
It's happening too frequently, sir.
It's all right. Give others a chance to prove in there.
One last question, sir, and this is about North Korea and the fact that the US is saying that obviously a lot of tests are going on, but there's something I want to pull out, sir, in what they've said, and I will quote it. They said recent launches by North Korea violate multiple UN Security Council resolutions and pose a threat to neighbors and the international community. They pose a threat to neighbors, and they're calling this out. They're stepping up their surveillance. But isn't that what Putin is saying about Ukraine? That Ukraine poses a threat to them by joining NATO. And the same thing is what you're now accusing North Korea. What is your take on that, sir? And we end with that question tonight.
Well, nobody says that any country or that a country needs to be consistent. You use whatever argument that you find convenient, depending on where you find yourself. But increasing their intelligence capabilities, what countries are supposed to do. So that's not news. What is news to me in this area is the fact that a conservative candidate who is a hardliner on relationship between South Korea and North Korea has just been elected president in South Korea. And he is, from the way I read him, he believes that the capability of South Korea itself should be strengthened considerably. And so he may just be coming on board at the right time when the Americans will welcome whichever way he can improve that capability, since they are busy elsewhere and the North Koreans themselves are busy improving their own capability. They may just with winks and nods and the assistance, clandestine or otherwise, help South Korea to become, a power in that part of the world.
On that note, sir, we end the program for tonight. Thank you very much for your time, and to our viewers who have been there right from the start, thank you very much for your time this evening. Please do not forget, click the subscribe button, and also feel free to share the link when you get the invites. Let's get more people on the program listening to these fantastic sessions with our dear Prof. Thank you very much, sir, for another fantastic session. And to our viewers, we will see you next week, same time.